So rather than chant, I'm just going to say a few words about motivation. So when I was in Kopan for the November course that I taught, there was one young man who really got stuck on one point about beginningless mind, and which is not uncommon because it's quite a concept to deal with. But the point that he was really stuck on was that from a beginningless past, it seems like one could have tried everything and still not succeeded. So why is there any hope that one could succeed now? And so there, in answer to that, there's two things that one has to consider when you're looking at a beginningless continuum of the mind. It's not the same thing as looking at the endless continuum, where one can, keep thinking about a future opportunity. And sometimes when you look into a beginningless continuum, it seems like you could look at it the same way. Always a previous opportunity, a previous opportunity, a previous opportunity. But, it kind of ignores the fact of what we have right now, which is an opportunity that maybe we didn't have in the past. And to think that, oh, we must have had every opportunity in the past because of, infinite, right? Infinite. And yet, that doesn't take into consideration the second point, which is that we have a very strong tendency to repeat what we've done in the past. We form habits and even unconsciously have habits where we keep, when under similar circumstances arising, will behave in the same way that we've done in the past. So the kind of vicious circle of death and rebirth, there's also a vicious circle of acting in the same way that we've acted in the past, again and again and again. So even though there is a beginningless mental continuum, it doesn't mean that one has had every opportunity to engage in every kind of practice that exists. The teachings of the Buddha are quite rare, in fact. And even when we look at the Buddha's teachings on selflessness, for instance, he was in India, he was famous for the teaching on anatma, selflessness. And no other teacher had taught anything like that. And how the mind is the creator of all experience. No other spiritual teacher had taught anything like that. So the teachings of the Buddha, which are essential for achieving liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, let alone to achieve supreme Buddhahood by abandoning all the obstacles to knowledge, as well as the obstacles to liberation. Those teachings are rare. And it's not as if there's always a founding Buddha to teach and introduce the full path to enlightenment. Shakyamuni, before he taught, there was no teachings like that existing on the earth. And it was when he, in a former lifetime, he made a vow to when he became a Buddha, that he would manifest Buddhahood as a founding teacher during the time of great degeneration, which is our time. And the other bodhisattvas who were, heard his vow were quite surprised that anybody would want to try to found the Buddhist teachings at a time of great degeneration, when, for the most part, living beings aren't interested in those kinds of teachings. They're mainly, interested in the happiness of the current lifetime. They're people who are born with those are the strongest propensities. Not many people are born with the, naturally saint-like behavior, and so rather people are, we expect people to be, self-centered, and of course it's very seldom you find a child who isn't, and they have to be taught, how to be better human beings, and that's not easy. And then of course they can be pretty good until they become teenagers, and then it's, completely taken over by hormones. And then, then they once they get out of school, then they have to compete with others, and then there's, all kinds of objects they want to have and experiences they want to have, and all of that costs money, and so then they compete for jobs, and and the competitive mind is not an altruistic mind. Competitive mind wants me first, right? And so and then the lifespan is so short that it's rare that they have much time to practice. Like when a person gets older, they're not, so much motivated by, finding the perfect partner. When you're young and healthy, there's hormones that help you find that or force you to look for that. But as you get older, there's not as much of a push. So then you have a lot more time for other things, and yet there's not much time, right? Like during this age, they say that the lifespan is around 100 years at best. And there's a few exceptions, that you hear about that, like rarely you'll find somebody who's over 100 and looking for, you know, some kind of recognition on Facebook for being over 100. Or then there might be, somebody who's like set a record at like 124 or something like that. And that's not much time, especially when you consider what needs to be done to actually achieve just liberation, let alone supreme enlightenment. Yeah. Like not only does one have to find a teacher who knows the path, but then one has to study with that teacher and remove all doubts about the points that are being raised by the teacher. And then, one has to engage in meditation. And if one's meditation is full of distraction, then not much is going to be accomplished. With a distracted mind, the Buddha said you could meditate for 100 years and you still wouldn't be able to, generate a sustained realization of anything. It'd still be, kind of still on a superficial level of thought. So then to overcome distraction, then you would have to engage in something like calm abiding meditation. But if you've ever tried to do calm abiding meditation, it's really difficult. And especially if you don't have a good environment for it. And what's a good environment? Well, someplace it's really quiet, day and night. During the day, there's not a lot of human activity around. At nighttime, there's not a lot of barking, dogs and the like. It's hard to find something like that. And even to be in an environment where what you're doing is respected by others, like who stays by themselves in the forest, Crazy people, people who don't like other people, like that. So, but to have people recognize what you're doing as something really great and support it, and even want to bring food to you and make sure that you're well sustained, where does that exist? Here we live in a culture where there's no free lunches. In India, there was a case. People would still provide food for the meditators, for the mendicants, the sadhus. They would provide food, but here it's totally different, right? And how long does it take to develop karma budding? There's no guarantee how long it takes to develop karma budding, but that's, and usually, to have there are people who develop it. There's no doubt, even now, there's people who develop really good concentration, but it's not easy to do. And then once you have good concentration, to then be able to do an analysis on ultimate reality, which is not easy to understand. Even gaining the right conception is not easy. So then to be able to then focus one's mind with the right understanding and to do it consistently such that the conceptual understanding that you have of reality is able to be exhausted and that one's pushed to gain the correct and experiential understanding of ultimate reality then transcends conceptual thought and gains a direct experience. That takes time. That takes time. And then that's the path of seeing. Well, there's a path of meditation to go through next. And, in some presentations, that's like done in one lifetime, but other presentations, it's, even for a person who's just trying to achieve liberation, it can take several lifetimes to do that. So you become, there's a stream enter in the path of seeing, there's the once returner on the path of meditation, there's the no more returner on the path of meditation, and then finally gaining arhatship. So there's, it all takes time. So within a short 100-year lifespan, there's not very much time to accomplish the path. And even with the tantric teachings, which we have now, and the Buddha has said that, that during what's referred to as this fortunate great eon, there'll be 1,000 founding Buddhas. And Shakyamuni is number 4. And so he taught the Tantras, but the first 3 didn't teach Tantra. Maitreya is not predicted to teach the Tantra. The last Buddha, through logical reasoning, he may teach the Tantra just because he vowed to teach whatever the previous 999 Buddhas taught, which includes the Tantra, because Shakyamuni taught the Tantra. But Tantra is not something that's commonly taught. From many, spiritual paths, the kind of things that Tantra utilizes to quickly achieve Buddhahood are like considered off limits to the spiritual practitioner. Even there's, like for instance, a Brahmin, a person in India, they don't eat meat and they have special diets. And to think that a tantric practitioner like twice a month is going to have alcohol and meat and as part of their ceremony, that's like completely off limits, right? So like that, there's even more things that are considered taboo by other spiritual traditions when it comes to Tantra. So Tantra is not taught to everyone. Not everyone has that capacity to be willing to even have an open mind to think that some of the activities of the tantric practitioner are spiritual. So, and yet, even though the tantric is advertised as, achieving supreme enlightenment in like one short lifetime, the amount of time it takes to become a qualified person who can successfully practice the tantra and achieve enlightenment in one short lifetime, there's no advertising of how long that takes. So, so for Shakyamuni to be willing to found the Buddha Dharma in this period of degeneration, when the lifespans are so short, um, is quite rare. And then even when there's a Buddha teaching someplace, like so, when the Buddha taught in India, there were some great beings at the same time in other places, like Lao Tzu in China, who's the founder of Taoism. Um, there were some great, I can't think of, Pythagoras in Greek, in Greece. He was quite amazing. He even could remember former lifetimes and even remember their names, the names that he had in former lifetimes. And one person was speculating, how did he get that memory? Was he born with such a memory, or did he develop through meditation? And if he developed it through meditation, who taught him that? Because the tradition of meditating like that didn't exist in Greece, in that area. But there were Buddhist missionaries. He could have met Buddhist missionaries who taught him that. So, but rare, okay, rare. In Europe, we don't have our European culture, and we don't have a tradition of the kind of meditation that existed in India, like calm abiding and the like. So the Buddha taught in India, but that teaching, it took a while before it to spread around, right? It took a while. And then even once it spread to different places, then even then it was persecuted in places. And then even in India, it ceased to exist for a while. But here we were lucky enough that now, even in our neighborhood, we can find a Buddhist center like here. When I didn't know it, but when I was in college in university in Wisconsin, I didn't realize that Geshe Zopa was a member of the faculty in Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison, just like a half an hour down the road from where I was. Had no idea that was existing. I didn't even know about Tibetan Buddhism, really. I think that I had seen something on TV when I was a kid, a Lowell Thomas Passage to Adventure kind of thing, where he filmed the Dalai Lama as a child and some other activities in Tibet, and in the Natural History Museum in Chicago. So during the time when I was living in a suburb of Chicago, we could go there and see an exhibit of Tibetan Buddhism, but never thought that that was an actual opportunity to achieve my dreams by following Tibetan Buddhism. And it just happened by pure chance. And then for many of my generation, it was like that, just by pure chance. Some people knew, like when I arrived in Dharamsala, India, it was just by pure chance that people I was traveling with, we met somebody who'd been traveling in India for 6 months and asked him where the most interesting place he'd been in 6 months. And he said, oh, just down the road in Dharamsala. He said, it's a 6,000 foot um, village with 18,000 foot mountain behind. It says it's cool. So, and this was during August. So it's cool, not so hot. He said, and very nice people there, Tibetan refugees and white snow monkeys. And I'm not sure what reason we went there for. Could have been the white snow monkeys or having such a great view of, 6,000 feet looking over the northern Buddhist plain of the Punjab. So, and then when I was there, I found out about the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives and met people who came there specifically to study, and then attended the classes with them because we'd become friends. And even then I thought, oh, I'll take classes in Tibetan language. That'll be a good exercise for my mind because it was the first year I was out of school, right? So I'd been a student for almost 22 years. So first year out, and I was feeling like kind of lazy in my mind. I needed some discipline. And so I thought Tibetan language. Never thought about Tibetan Buddhism as being, something that would be worth my while. But because of my friends were attending the class and I attended it as well. So it was like that. And there was no centers around any place outside. The Tibetan diaspora had not circulated very far. So there's, it's rare to find opportunities to meet the teachings. And then even when you meet the teachings, even if you met and received teachings from the highest masters of the Tibetan tradition, right? Like the Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, at that time, Dujin Rinpoche was still alive. He was the head of the Nyingma tradition. Sakya Trizin, the highest masters one could receive teachings and initiations from, and like this junior and senior tutor to the Dalai Lama, these other great masters, Senchab Serkon Rinpoche, so many great masters were happy to teach Westerners because they found that the Westerners were like themselves in ancient times, going all the way to India to meet the teachings. And they saw the Westerners doing the same thing. And they thought, this is similar to us in the past, so we'll try to give them what's so precious to ourselves. And yet, and then other masters, like Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, and so on, who very incredible compassion to guide, really guide, be mentors to their students. And yet, when you look at how much time one actually practices, how much time one actually like transforms one's thoughts into the Dharma, like overcoming the habit of the eight worldly dharmas, which just only concerned with pleasure and avoiding pain, only concerned with gaining wealth and avoiding poverty, being scared to death of poverty, uh, working for praise, being upset with criticism, seeking a good reputation, being frightened of having a bad reputation. These kind of this is what motivates people most of the time. And having had such blessings and such teachings, we still, and when you get out of bed in the morning, what's the first thought? The first thought is maybe just, oh, I have to get up and go to work. Then the next, I hope the bathroom is available, especially if you're sharing one bathroom with a couple of other people. So, and then, then you brush your teeth because, you don't want to suffer tooth decay or you want to have good breath. You don't want to be talking to people and them having to turn around and look elsewhere. Things like that. Instead of, like Song Rinpoche said, when you get up in the morning, you should think, today I'm going to make my Dharma practice better this year than the year that ended yesterday. He said, that's the first thought. Or in teachings like in the Vajrayogini Tantra practice, the thought that you have when you wake up in the morning is like goddesses in the four directions are singing the song of the four mindfulnesses. Not four mindfulnesses, singing the song of the love, compassion, uh, joyfulness, and equanimity. Those four. So it's rare, or if you're practicing the Mother Tantras, to begin each action with the left hand rather than the right. And Song Rinpoche said, well, the only way you're going to be able to do that, he said, is when you get out of bed, make sure that your left foot hits the floor first. And that way you've begun all actions during the day with the left. Very skillful. So And so even having met the teachings, having the greatest masters who walked the planet as one's teachers, in providing the best of examples, it's still rare to have any sense that one has, made any real transformation within oneself. So, like that, it's possible that even though the mental continuum is beginningless, we can still have a long way to go with respect to having new opportunities to practice things that we've never done before. And so, like, with respect to the practice of the Dharma, the beginning of the practice is listening to the teachings. And listening to the Dharma teachings is very different from listening to any other subject. We all have, spent so many years in education, and even after graduating, we still have to learn so many things with our jobs and the like. So we know how to listen to gain knowledge and to be able to use that knowledge. But there's very few times that we listen to transform ourselves. That's completely different. You can sit for years to gain knowledge. Like, let's say you want to be a doctor. Well, it takes a heck of a long time to become a doctor, and it's a big effort. I mean, all the things that you have to learn. I mean, let alone the names of all the bones and my goodness, so many things that you have to learn. And yet, when learning all of that, you don't have to change yourself internally to become a better human being. It's kind of external. It's like an internal library that you have access to, but it's still the same you. Whereas with the Dharma, totally different. We're listening to the Dharma to change ourselves, to transform ourselves into something that is on a path to liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, on the path to Buddhahood, like that. That's what we're listening to the teachings for. Totally different motivation than what we're used to when we're gaining knowledge. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this teaching, having an opportunity to do something completely different than what one has been doing in countless previous lifetimes. We have that opportunity now. So last week I introduced the subject, the author, Atisha, and we went through the homage that Atisha wrote at the beginning of this text, the homage to great compassion, the homage to the teachers, and the homage to the faith divinities or the meditational deities, like that. And now we begin the actual subject. So Atisha says, discard all lingering doubts and strive with dedication in your practice. So you'll find with this presentation, it's not focused on cultivating loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, or the right view, which most teachings that we receive, that's what the focus is on. This teaching is the focus on how to conduct your life. And I remember Lama Yeshe once saying that my job is to teach you the ultimate truth, and it's your job to incorporate it into your relative truth. But here, Atisha is talking about giving advice on how to conduct your relative truth, on your everyday life, what to keep in mind, and how to incorporate the teachings into your everyday life. So to begin with was discard lingering doubts. So the antidote to doubt is wisdom, intelligence. We use our wisdom intelligence to do fine analysis by means of which we can eliminate any doubts that we have about the teachings so that we have the correct understanding. And that wisdom is achieved through learning and through contemplation. There's generally there's three types of wisdom that are mentioned: the wisdom of learning, the wisdom of contemplation, the wisdom of meditation. So the wisdom of learning is where you develop an understanding of the Dharma topic by depending upon the reasoning and examples provided by a teacher or the author of a text. The wisdom of contemplation is where you think about what you have learned through a teacher and through text, and then you use your own reasons and your own examples to make it clear. And by means of those two, wisdom of learning, wisdom of contemplation, you can eliminate doubts about the topic that is to be meditated on. But then you have to move into meditation, because it's through meditation that one familiarizes yourself so much with that topic that you transform your mind into the meaning of the Dharma. You know, like for instance, you can develop the thought of enlightenment, the bodhicitta, by relying on the method of the six causes and effect method, of where you see all beings as one's mother and so on, and you arrive at the effect of the thought of Buddhahood comes to mind. May I achieve Buddhahood? But that's great to have that thought arising in the mind, but you need meditation to familiarize yourself with that thought so that it arises spontaneously in your mind without having to go through any step-by-step process of generating it. It arises spontaneously. It becomes your way of being. And that bodhicitta depends upon compassion, and compassion depends upon loving kindness. So it's like, it takes some time to develop these. Somebody with kama body meditation can develop, infinite love and great compassion swiftly, because they can familiarize themselves with the topic without any distraction. And so those states of mind can be, integrated into their mental continuum, so that their whole mental continuum is possessed by those ideas. And then, of course, the thought of achieving enlightenment for the benefit of all beings arises out of that, and then familiarizing oneself with that thought thoroughly so that it arises spontaneously. So we need to meditate. So, sometimes when we gain knowledge about something, so long as one can remember it, that's enough, right? One doesn't have to go to the textbook and look through the pages to find out the thing that you're looking for. So long as you can remember it, that's good enough. But the meditation is more than that. Of course, meditation depends upon the power of memory, without a doubt. That's kind of the lifeblood of meditation. It's part of not forgetting what you're supposed to be meditating on. But it's much more than that. It's making one's mind one with the topic, or making the topic one with one's mind, so that that's the way you think. And so we need to do that. We can't just leave it at the state of, oh, I understand it. I got it. I know what they're talking about. I don't need to hear that topic anymore. Teach me something different. It's not enough just to have the correct understanding and without any doubts. One needs to meditate on that. Then Atisha goes on, thoroughly relinquish drowsiness, mental dullness, and laziness, and strive always with joyous perseverance. Okay, so it's interesting that drowsiness, mental dullness, and laziness are big obstacles for developing a good concentration. Laziness is the first of the obstacles for developing calm abiding. Because laziness is a state of mind that's attached uh, to pleasurable things that are not the object of practice. And so it provides another form of laziness, which is procrastination, putting off, do later, what one could have been doing right now, but one doesn't want to do it right now because either one is engaged in some other subject like watching the NFL playoffs, or or maybe you're doing nothing, but you didn't realize how good nothing felt until the thought, maybe I should be meditating. Then you realize how just sitting there doing nothing felt so good. That's another form of laziness. And then the other form of laziness is discouragement. The thought arises, okay, maybe I should be meditating. Then the thought is, what good is meditation? I can't meditate. I get distracted so easy. I don't get any bliss when I meditate. I just end up falling asleep. I end up, no good comes from my meditation. Why should I even try? Those are discouraging thoughts. It's a form of laziness. So that's why laziness is considered to be the first of the obstacles that the meditator needs to overcome. And one overcomes laziness, first of all, with the mind of faith. And faith is a mind that has a confident understanding. One is confident in the existence of something, such as the ability to for meditation to transform your mind, the ability to develop a meditative state where you can meditate single-pointedly without distraction, having confidence that that exists, and then having confidence in all of the functions that an undistracted state of mind can produce. Like being able to gain direct realization of ultimate reality, gaining liberation from the obstacles, such as the afflictions of greed, hatred, ignorance, and all the other obstacles, as well as overcoming karma, the seeds of karma in one's continuum. Being able to achieve all of these states, being able, even before you've achieved that, even being able to have an experience of such bliss in meditation that it eclipses the kind of pleasures that the so-called ordinary pleasures. So all of having confidence that that is all possible is the beginning of the antidote to laziness. And then because of having confidence in the possibilities that the practice allows one to have, one generates aspiration to achieve it. And then with aspiration, thinking I must achieve it, not only for my own sake, but here we're dealing with the bodhisattvas, but for the sake of all living beings. Like one of the trainings in a person who wants to train in being a bodhisattva is by seeing themselves as a servant for all living beings. Okay, so being a servant for all living beings. So a really good servant, and of course that's what you want to be, a really good servant, is somebody who wants to increase their ability to benefit the ones that they're serving. So the best way to be a servant of all living beings is by being able to guide all living beings out of suffering into perfect happiness. So the best way the only way to do that is by becoming a Buddha. So having, this aspiration to become a Buddha to benefit all living beings, and then generating enthusiastic perseverance. This is the kind of effort that's needed to achieve the goal. Enthusiastic perseverance, and this is defined as the being delighting in virtuous activities. So one is delighted, one is happy to engage in virtuous activities. It's not considered a burden, because when one contemplates the benefits of virtues, one feels joyful that one has such an opportunity. And it's not an opportunity that depends upon anybody else. It's just oneself, training one's own mind. And because it doesn't depend upon anybody else, once you have the teachings, and by relying upon those teachings, by relying upon this kind of teaming up with the master, that you can put those teachings into practice, and one can gain all of the results. So joy arises because of that. And enthusiastic perseverance involves also sustaining that joy. So no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult it is, that one will do it because one continues to keep in mind the benefits of engaging in this practice. Like His Holiness, he says he recites a verse from Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara. There's a verse he recites every day that even for the sake of one living being, I'm willing to enter into the deepest hell for eons if I can free them from their suffering. So that's enthusiastic perseverance. And once you gain calm abiding, you develop a capacity of the mind that effortlessly turns towards concentration. There's no resistance at all. One can, whatever virtuous object one chooses to place one's attention on, the mind goes there effortlessly and stays with that object. And that's considered the actual antidote to all of the obstacles, especially that of laziness, like that. But in order to get there, you have to rely upon having a confident belief in the qualities that can be developed through meditation, having aspiration to achieve those qualities, and then generating the type of effort, this enthusiastic perseverance in cultivating, in actually engaging in the actions of meditation. So discard all lingering doubts and strive with dedication in your practice. Thoroughly relinquish drowsiness, mental dullness, and laziness, and strive always with joyous perseverance. So when you are meditating, there's a subtle obstacle that can arise, and that's mental dullness. And this type of dullness is a lack of intensity in holding the object of meditation. And this is something that you won't notice until you're able to actually hold an object of meditation for some time. And sometime, maybe just a few minutes. But when you're holding the object for a few minutes, you can notice that you can get into kind of a fixation where you're holding the object, but with not as much intensity as you would originally had in holding the object. So then what you need to do is again increase the intensity of holding the object of meditation. And this becomes a point of skill, because if you hold the object too strongly, then problems can arise. One problem that can arise, especially for beginners, if you hold the object too strongly, you develop a kind of frustration in one's body that the Tibetans call it a lung disease, because lung is their word for prana. It's the movement of energy in the body, and so one is the movement of energy goes according to the way one is used to, you know. And then when you try to do something very different with it, and you try to force yourself to do something different, then it creates a kind of frustration within oneself that can cause headaches. It can also cause a pain in the heart area. It can cause shaking. This not only can meditators experience this, but scholars who are trying, especially in the Buddhist world, where they do a lot of memorization, then the same kind of problem can arise. So, so if you hold the object too strongly, then a problem can arise. So you have to relax the intensity, but you can't over relax the intensity. There's also for a skilled meditator, this this mental dullness or a drop in the intensity of holding the object, it's more subtle, and that can, but still, when you hold the object too tightly, then it can cause the mind to want to go to other objects. It's like, I can't bear this, and the mind scatters to other objects. So the Buddha described it as, you have to be skillful, like somebody tuning the strings to a guitar. If it's too tight, you get the wrong sound. If it's too loose, you get the wrong sound. So you have to hold the object at the right intensity. And that's a point of skill. But that will help overcome the mental dullness. And then with drowsiness, when you're meditating, because you're just meditating on one object and we're not like thinking about all kinds of different things, sometimes we get distracted and then we start dreaming and then we go into a drowsy state of mind. So one has to snap out of it. You snap out of it and you think about, for instance, hey, death could occur at any time. I have to meditate. I have to use this moment of life, so don't sleep now. But maybe that's not enough. Maybe one has to like get up and walk around or do some exercise. And there was one great master, Geshe Rapton was his name. He was one of the teachers of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. And he lived in Dharamsala on the mountainside above Makladganj. He had a little cabin where he lived in, and every now and then you'd see him circumambulating his cabin, because he had sacred text in his cabin and an altar in his cabin. And so by circumambulating, he would accumulate merit, but at the same time, he could like freshen himself up to be able to meditate without drowsiness. And then sometimes you just need sleep. Sometimes you just need sleep. So you shouldn't, feel bad about needing sleep. Sleep is one of the, it's a form of nourishment. And there are meditators who develop, strong Sangupona concentration. That's another form of nourishment. And they can do with less and less sleep. But if we don't have such samadhi, such Sangupona concentration, then we need the right amount of sleep. So then, so there's, the Buddha recommended to not sleep in the first part of the night or the last part, but only sleep in the middle of the night, like that. So, so like the Dalai Lama, he gets up at about 3 in the morning and starts doing his practice, has a little bit of breakfast, starts doing his practice. And he gets up so early because he's very busy during the day. There's so many people who want to meet him and so many responsibilities that he has that the only time of the day that he has to meditate is the time of the day when everybody else is sleeping. So he gets up early and does his practices at that time. And yeah, so and there are still meditators, like people in retreat, who they never even lay down. You see these meditators who are in these little, I don't know, it's more than a lean-to, little cells that are just big enough. They're just big enough to sit in, and they are surrounded by, you know, blankets and so on, and wrapped up in blankets, and in Tibet, and that's where they stay, except when they get up to go to the bed, lay down to sleep. So Lama Zopa had a reputation of not sleeping. And when I heard about these great meditators who didn't lay down uh, at night, then I tried to do that when I was first in Kopan. And I was in a small cell, but at least it was the length of my body. I could have laid down if I wanted to. And there were some problems that I started to notice. One of the problems was I would wake up in the morning and have this like bump or scratch on my forehead. And it was because I would fall over and hit my head on the table that was in front of me. And then I developed this lung disease, and I went to the doctor, and he was, trying to find a solution for it. And he was asking me about my lifestyle and how I was eating and everything. And then at one point I mentioned that, I was not laying down when I slept, sitting up. And then he and the translator both started to laugh. And they said, well, the cure for your lung disease is to lay down and get a good night's sleep. So, you hear these stories and you try to do something, but you don't know the real details that, it's people who don't uh, don't have to lay down when they go to sleep. They're somebody. They've done some advanced states of meditation, and or like Lama Zopa, who's in his former lifetime he had achieved the perfection of a meditation technique in the Nyingma tradition. There's like four visions that are involved in it, and he had achieved the fourth. So he'd done everything that method needed. So he was already somebody. He's fortunate that he decided to appear again in the human realm. So yeah, he didn't need to sleep as much as the rest of us. So these details I was not aware of at the time. So like that. So if you need to sleep, sleep, and you can sleep with the thought that now I'm sleeping is part of my practice for enthusiastic perseverance. Even the Shantideva said that in the chapter of cultivating enthusiastic perseverance. He said resting is important because if you just wear yourself out, you'll be useless. You won't be able to serve living beings. You won't be able to make any effort to achieve Buddhahood. Your mind will be sluggish and won't be able to do anything. So we need to rest in order to gain the energy for the practice. So then the next verse, with mindfulness, vigilance, and conscientiousness, constantly guard the gateway of your senses. So mindfulness and vigilance are important practices for developing calm abiding. They're important anyway, but especially for developing calm abiding, you see a lot of commentary on them. So mindfulness is not forgetting. the object of meditation. Although the term mindfulness is used to describe a meditation technique that comes from Burma, the actual term mindfulness is refers to not forgetting the object of meditation, like in the Sutra of the Four Mindfulnesses, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of concentration. The Buddha was saying you have to remember certain things about the body, about feeling, about thoughts, about concentration, or about consciousness, like that. So the practice of mindfulness here, in general, is remembering the object of meditation. So you can't meditate on something that you can't remember. And that's why, like, for instance, people who are using an object that they visualize, a visualized object for meditation, they will, first of all, gain an image of that object, whether it's a painting, a photo, or a statue of that object. They'll have that, and then they'll look at that, and then they'll try to visualize that object in their mind. But they can, if they can't remember it, they'll look over at the object and that's, and then they'll try to visualize it with using their mind's eye, not their visual consciousness, their mind's eye. And sometimes when you're meditating on trying to visualize something, it's good to open your eyes a little bit so that you can distinguish between using your eyes to see something and using your mental consciousness to visualize something. Because in developing concentration, you need your mental consciousness, not the five sense consciousnesses. And yeah, and similarly, even when one is not in meditation, mindfulness is important because you need to put into practice the teachings that you've heard. And so to do that, you have to remember to put them into practice. So mindfulness is important even when one is not meditating. And then also another antidote to the problems like the subtle mental dullness and also the scattering of the mind to other objects. The antidote to that is vigilance. So vigilance is it's a part of one's intelligence, and it's sometimes likened to a spy in the mind, which looks occasionally to say, okay, what am I doing? Am I still with the object of meditation, or have I been distracted? So that you don't apply it all the time, but you apply it periodically, and of course, the when one's concentration is weak, then you have to apply it more often. Like, for instance, in the 9 stages of developing calm abiding, you have the initial stage is being able to initially place the mind on the object, and that's and mainly through the power of the learning what the object is. You use that to place the mind on the object, and then you can hold the object a little bit longer. So there's continuous placement, but it doesn't last very long, and after that there's patch-like placement, and that's where you can place the mind on the object, but then you become distracted, and then you have to bring your attention back to the object, and that happens over and over again during the meditation session. So what you want to do is to try to recognize as quickly as possible when one is distracted, even to be able to recognize when one is about to be distracted. So, and that subtlety, use of vigilance, probably doesn't occur until one has reached the 4th stage of the 9 stages of calm abiding, which is the close placement of mindfulness. So there, you don't forget the object of meditation for the whole meditation session. Your mind can stay. Your power of memory is so strong that you always stay with the object. But at that point, you can know when there's this tendency, this feeling where you're about to leave the object of meditation. Then you have to like apply some antidote, like, oh, just immediately, apply more effort and keep your mind on that. Or if you're holding it too tight, to relax it a little bit, but not over relaxing so that one goes into a duller state of attention. So vigilance is what informs you of whether one's about to go into a scattered state, losing the object, or into a dull state. So it's only the beginning. You have to apply antidotes, but it is important. So even when one is like during the time when one is when one is listening to teachings, in order to gain the knowledge that one is seeking, one has to listen. And there's distractions that arise, like a question can arise in one's mind, and then one tries to analyze that question. And while one is analyzing the question, one is not hearing the teachings. So one has to kind of write down the question quickly. So when one has the opportunity to ask it, then one is able to remember what the question was. But to spend all the time thinking about that question, oh, I wonder, one's not listening to the teaching, or thinking about what one needs to do, like after the teaching is over, like it's going to be around lunchtime. I wonder what I'll have for lunch today. And during those thoughts, one's not listening to the teachings. Or one might be listening with the wrong motivation, thinking, oh, Joe's not here. I bet she's never heard this before. Oh, I can't wait to ask Joe the question on this. I know he won't know the answer, but I'll know the answer. So listening with the wrong motivation like that. So one needs vigilance, to be able to remember to why one is listening, remember the right motivation to listen properly like that. So one needs vigilance all the time, but especially the subject comes up when one is in the discussion of developing calm abiding. And conscientiousness, it's not generally mentioned in calm abiding, but it can be applied to calm abiding, because the two other obstacles for developing calm abiding is not applying the antidotes when they need to be applied, or over applying the antidotes when they don't need to be applied. And conscientiousness is basically just being careful of one's body, speech, and mind to do what is skillful to achieve these happiness, and avoid what is unskillful that causes one to achieve suffering instead of happiness. So conscientiousness is carefulness. So one can apply it in developing calm abiding, such that if one's vigilance points out the fact that one is about to leave the object and go after, usually it's an object, a pleasurable object, a pleasurable memory, something like that, that one needs to apply an opponent. An opponent to the pleasurable memory would be thinking that I can think about this some other time. Right now, I need to focus my mind and develop concentration. Or, yeah, it was a pleasurable memory, but it's not liberation. Liberation will be much more pleasurable. I would like the pleasure of knowing that I don't have to suffer ever again. That would be great. So let's make priorities here. So that's applying an opponent. So one needs to apply an opponent when it's needed, but if you apply an opponent when it's not needed, when the mind is like continuously in a state of single point of concentration, and then out of the habit of using vigilance, one then, with a part of one's mind, will say, am I being distracted right now? Am I being in a state of lesser attention that I need? Should I be thinking about some opponent like death and impermanence? And those thoughts are a distraction from what one was already doing. So that's over application of the antidotes, which can be an obstacle for developing calm abiding. But generally, conscientiousness is something that one needs to apply all the time, to be careful. Like Geshe-no Darge, when he was giving a commentary on this text, he says, it's like older people. He says, older people, they always take so much time to make a decision because they have so much experience to know how things can go wrong and how many times they've made a decision about something and it was a mistake. So they really take their time before they engage in some action to be sure that it's the right action. And then when they take action, it's always a bit slow to be sure they're doing it right. He said, so, and they're very careful. That's why they're slow. They're very careful. And that carefulness is because of a life of experience. So even when one's young, one can still, use one's intelligence to guard one's actions. And it's not only the three doors of body, speech, and mind where action takes place, but it's also guarding one's senses. So, like generally speaking, uh, any any pleasurable experience will get attached to. Any unpleasant experience, we can easily develop some kind of anger towards, impatience towards. So you have to be on guard for that. So, pleasurable experiences, rejoice. That's nice, but you have to guard yourself from attachment by knowing that this is an impermanent thing, and it's nice that it's happened, and then one can experience it, and when it's over, then it's over. Let it go, instead of wanting to hang on to it and hanging on to something that, by its very nature, is impermanent and passing. And similarly with the unpleasant experiences, well, this is also an impermanent phenomenon. It will go, and while I'm experiencing this, if there's no antidote to it, then all I can do is experience it. So I better just experience it without letting anger arise, because then I'll create the cause for more unpleasantness. So one needs to have a guard of the senses. In some tantric practices, they actually have the practice of imagining deities inside their eyes, deities inside their ears, deities inside their nose, deities inside their tongue, deities throughout their body, so that whatever experiences arise are experienced through the deities. And those deities experience things always as great bliss arising from their wisdom, which is realized in the emptiness of inherent existence, which never changes. So it's a continuous blissful experience, not the experience of an ordinary person, which is up and down, up and down, up and down. So that was being with mindfulness, vigilance, and conscientiousness, constantly guard the gateway of your senses. Again and again, 3 times, both day and night, examine the flow of your thoughts. So here, flow of thoughts means what your motivation is. Am I engaged in thoughts that are just concerned with the happiness of this life? Or am I engaged in thoughts of cultivating altruism, cultivating the thought of enlightenment for the benefit of all living beings, cultivating the correct view, cultivating a view of subtle impermanence to lead to the correct view? Am I cultivating the correct view in order to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings? Or am I cultivating the right view in order to just achieve liberation for myself alone? That's what is referred to here as the flow of thoughts, rather than doing a meditation on the impermanence, subtle impermanence of the mind, or doing a meditation on like the Mahamudra meditation, which is meditating on the emptiness of inherent existence of the mind itself. So here it's just referring to something that's easy to understand if you know how to recognize, what one is, the difference between being motivated by just for the happiness of this lifetime, as opposed to being motivated for the happiness of future lifetimes, being motivated for the happiness of liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, or being motivated to achieve the state of supreme Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. And it says 3 times by day and 3 times by night. Well, actually, one should be checking one's mind all the time to make sure that it arises all the time. But where do you begin? So Atisha is recommending 3 times by day and 3 times by night. So he's dividing the day up into, say, 6 periods. That's 4 hours each time, 4 hours at a time. And at the beginning of each of those 4 hours, one cultivates the thought, what am I thinking of right now? What am I doing? But and there are in retreat, it's possible to do that, to divide the day up into 6 periods of 4 hours each, and maybe meditate, sleeping for 4.5 hours, then meditate, dividing the rest of the day up into sessions of meditation in certain times where one is eating and washing and things like that. But other times, I know that there are practices like people who receive initiation into the highest class of Tantra, Manitara Tantra. Then they take the responsibility to do a prayer called 6 session Guru Yoga. And so 6 sessions means 6 times a day you have to recite this. And the 6 sessions are like 6 times in the day. But in retreat, it's possible to do that. But a lot of practitioners, because they've made a vow it's kind of like a word of honor to do this prayer, then they want to be sure that they do it. So there were one translator for Geshe-no and Dargay. There are 2 translators, but I don't know whether I think both of them, they would recite the 6 session Guru Yoga in the morning, all 6 sessions. They'd recite the prayer 6 times in the morning, just be sure that, in the afternoon I could die. So I want to be sure I do it all 6 times in a day. And then a lot of other people will do like 6 times in the morning and 6 times later in the day, like in the afternoon or in the evening, like that. I do like 6 times or 3 times in the morning as part of beginning before I would do my sadhana practices. And then like the other 3 times I'd recite on the driving home from work and things like that. I had a whole setup. And then when I retired, I have to change that setup. So I would not forget to do the 3 times in the afternoon or in the evening. So you have to, make an arrangement. And so if it's so important to check one's motivation during the day, that Atisha, in this short text, is like 111 lines. And he says, we should check our mind 3 times by day, 3 times by night. Then he means that, this is really important to think about it. And although we should be having the right motivation throughout all the activities that we have in the day, then we have to begin somewhere. So beginning by doing it, like when you get up in the morning, when you're like at meal times, for instance, that's 3 times right there. And there could be other times when one is doing a sadhana practice, a meditation practice. That's another time to remember it. So that it doesn't have to be 6 times to start, but sometimes get in the habit of doing it and then increase it more and more, so that, any, especially if there's some big activities that one's doing, important activities that one is doing, when even in the practice of taking refuge, one is recommended to take refuge before one begins. And so at that point is also an opportunity to check the mind. So am I taking refuge because I want the Buddha to help me be rich? Or am I taking refuge to achieve a higher rebirth, to achieve liberation, to achieve Buddhahood, like that? So the next verse is, reveal your own shortcomings, but do not seek out others' errors. So here, this is part of the practice of avoiding the worldly thinking that is just seeking the happiness of the present lifetime. So being attached um, to one's own reputation, and because of that, one might conceal one's own shortcomings. But this is something that we have to um, find a middle way for. It's not necessary to proclaim to the world all of one's faults, right? It's not necessary to do that. You know, it's it's useful to be able to have like a spiritual master that one can discuss some of the problems that one has, and in that way one can find a solution to it, and also one can have a better perspective of what those shortcomings are and how one should regard them. Because sometimes if you keep it all inside, one may have exaggerated how bad it really is. Like there was during the course in Kopan, I had one-on-ones with people, and this one person, he had something that had been holding in for a long time, and so and then he told me about it. He's never told anybody about this, and he told me about it, and it was not as bad as he had developed the thought in his mind. He'd really exaggerated it, and once it was out and we could discuss it and how to think about it in a more realistic way, it really helped his practice. So there are times when it's really useful to have somebody that one can discuss um, different shortcomings with, but one has to choose wisely. Like in the Catholic tradition, there was the confessor, having somebody that you could confess your sins to, and it wasn't like a child. Like as I grew up and going to Catholic schools and stuff like that, so it was just you couldn't remember anything you did wrong, and you didn't want to talk about something you did wrong to a complete stranger, like that. So you just kind of have, oh, I lied 5 times. How many times should I say it that it sounds realistic? 5 times I lied, and blah, blah, blah. And then you would just get, you know, do 5 Hail Marys and 4 Glory Bees to things like that, prayers that you would do automatically. But then you would find sometimes you'd be in line and there would be adults and they'd be in there for a long time. You wonder what they were doing because it was more of a conversation. It was talking about things that really mattered. That they and so it's important to have somebody that you can talk to about those kind of things that that you to find to have at least another point of view about how to think about them and not somebody who's going to start blabbing all your faults to everybody. And although the kind of thoughts that an ordinary person has in their mind, it's like it's very useful that we don't have a speaker connected to our thoughts, right? Really is. And that's the case with everybody. Everybody has that. From countless lifetimes, we have all kinds of things that we've done. Those can leave impressions. You have something you come into contact with that reminds one of something that one has done in the past. One can have dreams like that, can have terrible dreams. But there's all kinds of things that can appear. And one can have, desires that one is unfulfilled, and then the desire energy becomes so strong that the desirous thoughts become perverse. And so, everybody has that. So one doesn't have to proclaim all the time. But it's good to to reveal one's shortcomings to somebody who will be useful to help one to overcome those shortcomings and have a realistic thought and find ways of dealing with them in the right way. And also, one doesn't need to, like through pretense, pretending to be something that you're not, in order for the sake of one's good reputation or trying to get somebody to do something for you, by pretending to have these qualities or being free from faults when you're not free from faults. Well, it's good to not have pretension like that. So keeping that in mind, then, but to not seek out others' errors. And this arises from having a good understanding of karma. When you understand karma, you know that all of one's experiences arise from one's former actions. So people who don't have an understanding of that, they're very easy. It's very easy in their mind to look for the causes of their problems outside themselves. And that's the wrong place to look, because oftentimes one has very little control over things that are outside yourself. Whereas if one's experiences of pleasure, pain, neutral experiences arise because of actions that one has done in the past, virtuous actions producing pleasant experiences, non-virtuous actions producing unpleasant experiences, neutral actions producing experiences neither pleasurable nor painful. Then if problems arise, one could say, well, I must have done something bad in the past for this to have happened. And that's the first thought with somebody who has a good understanding of karma. Now, of course, if problems are arising, one needs to find a solution, right? And a karma is not going to be experienced unless there's cooperative conditions for it to be experienced, right? Like somebody could have killed somebody in a former lifetime in warfare. So they could have the karma to experience the result of being killed in warfare. So if you're not in any warfare, then that karma won't be experienced. Maybe it could be experienced in some other way, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. You need the cooperative causes for an experience to arise, but the root cause is the imprints in one's mind from former actions. So, so if in finding solutions to problems, one can look, externally, but not put the initial blame on external causes, like in the fires in L.A. For sure, one's going to be looking for why those fires arose, but one shouldn't ignore the fact that the Santa Ana winds were stronger than they've ever been. That was, and there's no amount of preparation. What are you going to do? Build a huge wall around LA to prevent the Santa Ana winds from blowing like that? You can't do that. So, and it's just, it's not as if the fire department was not well trained. It's not as if there wasn't a lot of water in holding tanks. It was just more. The fires were more than anybody could have ever imagined. And if you had to plan for such extreme conditions like that, it would be extremely costly, and then it would be like very high taxes, and then nobody'd want to live there. So you have all of these. So it's important to look externally to see, well, what could have been done realistically. But out of a sense of being so hurt by what damage has been created, to then out of some anger impulse to put the blame someplace else, that's the mistake. That's a mistake. But certainly one needs to try to find solutions. But in many cases, especially in our country, when you've lived in Europe or lived in India, like that, there's not a whole lot of wilderness. Whereas in this country, there's a lot of wilderness. It's amazing how much wilderness there is. And then you have these towns that are adjacent to wilderness, and it's, you're going to have, you're going to deal with wildfires. And it's hard to deal with wildfires when you have, especially in a place where you can, uh, you know, not have enough rainfall for several years, and or maybe get a lot of rainfall and then have a lot of growth, and then not have continuous rainfall, and then that dries up. So you have a tremendous amount of fuel, and then you have these very strong winds, and fires can easily arise. All the time fires are rising, but when you have perfect conditions for this holocaust to take place, then it's just what to do. Sometimes all you can do is endure it. And then when you endure it, try to endure it with a peaceful state of mind, by thinking such things like that, I'm not the only one who. So there's some older people that were uh, interviewed that had lost this one older lady in her 90s who was interviewed, lost her house, but her point of view was so, I'm still alive, and so many other people lost things, especially these younger people with families. So there's so much suffering they have. Her mind was on, she was enduring her own loss in a way that her mind wasn't plagued by thoughts of anger and vengeance and like this. So that's what Atisha is getting at. Do not seek others' errors. Our job is to be careful over our own body, speech, and mind, so that we don't engage in non-virtue, and that we engage in virtue as much as possible. Conceal your own good qualities, but proclaim those of others. So this is another middle way we need to find. Concealing one's own good qualities is an antidote to the attachment to receiving praise, right? There is a desire to be praiseworthy. One enjoys being recognized for one's qualities, and one might, even if one develops a quality in private, one might try to make it well known what one has achieved, so that one receives the praise and one can enjoy being in the light of such praise. But that's just attachment to the happiness of the present life. And Atisha himself said that attachment to the happiness of the present life is a cause of lower rebirth, because you don't have to have a higher rebirth to think like that. So it's a cause for a lower rebirth. So one has to avoid such attachment. At the same time, if you're applying for a job, you need to praise yourself, right? So you need, when you're writing a resume, you need to point out your good qualities. When you're having an interview, you need to point out your good qualities. If you're having but it can be overdone, right? It can be overdone. The people who are interviewing you may also be interested in how well you work with others. So if you're trying to take credit for everything, they think, well, I don't think this person is a good team player. So it's good you can overdo it. And also, if you're getting a performance review, right, you need to demonstrate the why you're worth the money that they're paying you for, right? So you need to show what your good qualities are. But you can overdo it. Part of your good qualities is being able to work with a team and being able to recognize the qualities of others that you're working with, and the like. So, you can use this advice to try to find a middle way of avoiding, exaggerating one's qualities, avoiding being attached to receiving praise from others. You know, it's a pity somebody who, who maybe their job depends upon others liking them, right? Like, actors like that. So they have to, they're so attached to how others think about them. But then they become kind of a slave to that. And others' points of view, it's hard to control others' points of view. You might do something that others find praiseworthy, but then there's another group who finds that it's harmful or it's faulty. They can find fault with it. You know, you can find fault with anything. Even during the time of the Buddha, there were those who found fault with the Buddha. So it's hard to please others all the time. In fact, it's not possible. It's just not possible. As the saying goes, you can do it some of the time, but not all the time. So it's you're kind of setting yourself up for unhappiness if you're attached to praise. Then the next verse: forsake gain and respect, at all times relinquish your own renown. So that's the same idea. And as far as forsaking gain, it's the same thing. A middle way is needed. So it's, we, it's, when you go to the, a place like Nepal, and you might be from the middle class, but in Nepal, you have enough money in your pocket to be regarded as somebody from the upper class there. And but you know, in your own country, we work really hard because we've got all kinds of bills that we have to pay, and we don't want to be in a position where every hour we're called by a collection agency, or we're in danger of losing a place to live, and or getting our car repossessed, or all of those kind of horrific thoughts that go in the mind. Those are things that can be terrifying. Or if you want to retire and you think, if I got enough money to retire, am I sure I've got enough money to retire? And then you get a little terrified when you look at the bank account and you're coming to the end of the month and you may not be able to make it, and like all of those things. So we're very concerned about having enough wealth. But then it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to have so-called enough, right? And one of my close friends who had retired, and I was talking to him about how much money what's enough, how much money is enough to retire with, and he just told me straight off, without losing a beat, he said, "There's never enough." I said, "But how do you know when to retire then?" He said, it's just a question of how do you want to use your time? How do you want to use your time? Do you want to be working all the time? Or do you want to have time for other things, And then if you want to have time for other things, then you have to be able to cut back on some of the things that you're used to doing. You just have to accept that fact, or you might end up having to do some other work, even though it's not as you won't get as much for it as from the job you retired from. But maybe you're going to have to do something if you really need that extra money, if there's others who are depending upon you and like that. So that's just, then you can blame your karma for not practicing enough generosity in former lifetimes. And then how do you create the cause? And will the cause ripen in this lifetime? Uh-oh, there I go again, thinking of the present life only. It's hard, but, you know, That's why we're not enlightened yet, because it's not easy. So then have modest desires, Atisha says, and easily satisfied, and reciprocate kindness. So yeah, the person who has to have everything perfect, that can be difficult. If you're driving an old car and things are breaking down all the time and you want to have everything perfect, well, sometimes it's really, you don't need to have, the car can still run without everything functioning perfectly. The car can still run fine. But if you're somebody who needs everything perfect, then you're going to have to spend a lot of money. And to spend a lot of money, you have to make a lot of money. And if you want to make a lot of money, you have to dedicate time for doing that. If you dedicate times for making money, then you don't have time for other things that you feel are important too. Whereas if you're somebody who has, modest desires and are easily satisfied, like there's some people who they need to have a certain kind of diet, but not because their body requires it. It's because of ideas that they have. And then there's other people who they can just, they eat healthy, but it's nothing, they don't have to have sushi from a certain restaurant every day. They don't need that. They can, they have some vegetables, some this, that, maybe it's some rice. I talked to this one guy who was in an ashram in India, and he said, all we really need is some rice and a chapati and a little sabji, which is vegetables, and that's all we need. He said, you can't eat just rice because you don't get a complete protein, but if you mix that rice with um, with lentils, then you'll get a complete protein, and then a little bit of vegetables, you get the added vitamins, and that's all you need. And then in Nepal, they have that 3 times a day. 3 times a day. They don't have separate kind of food like cereal for breakfast. It's 3 times a day they have their dal, bhat, and sabji like that. And it's kind of interesting if you go to a place like when I did the course in Copan, well, I was going to be relying upon the whatever they were serving. They were asking, well, do you need this? Do you need that? I said, no, just whatever. And I was just used to that. I just became used to that. I don't know how I developed that, but I was just used to that. And so I was just eating their food, and that was fine. But I could just imagine somebody who'd just like, oh no, not again, having the same thing. Or says, oh, there's too much grains here. I need some meat. How come it's a vegetarian diet here? Like that. So it's, if you can, there I ate more than I would eat here, just because the reputation of the food there is that it's not as strong, because the it's like they don't use as much fertilizer, and the same ground has been used for growing things forever. So, and if there's not enough plant rotation, then your crops don't have as much nourishment in it like that. So I ended up eating more. Like I would eat breakfast there, but I still lost a little weight. So I followed that. It was Lama Yeshe who I think he said it, and then everybody followed that idea. And when in Nepal, eat more because of the food is not as nutritious. Remembering what Lama Yeshe once said. Whereas when you come to the West, the food is really nutritious generally. Of course, you can still find arguments being said, oh, but 1,000 years ago, the wheat was a lot more nutritious than it is now. Of course, if you had wheat from 1,000 years ago, then you could compare. But But to be able to say that and it's scientific, it's a little difficult if you can't actually compare. Anyway, you know, if you're somebody who's easy to please, but then again, if your body needs certain kind of food, then that's just necessity. And to eat food regarding food as fuel for for your energy and for the your length of life, then you have the right view towards food rather than seeing food as one source of happiness. You know, that there are those who they need to have a certain flavor. Or there's sometimes you can eat something and like if somebody asks, "What's the best meal you've ever had?" Boom, a memory comes. You don't have to think very long because there's some complete experience. It wasn't just the taste, there was this whole experience that you had that, like I can remember that meal. I can remember the view that I had. I can remember the company that I had, uh, and, uh, but wanting to have that again and again, to have, to go to the right restaurant with the right ambiance, with the right way of serving the meal, to have the right kind of food delivered in the right amount of time so that you have enough time to like have conversations and stuff. And the meal can take maybe a few hours like that. And when you go out to eat in France, that's all you're going to eat at a dinner. That's all you're going to do that night. It's not dinner and a movie. If you want dinner and a movie, you go to like a bistro and then go to the movie. But if you want a dinner at a restaurant, that's at least a couple hours. So, but there are people who that's what they want all the time. And that's too bad because, then they're not going to be easy to please. And then they're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to get that. And they're going to be disappointed a lot. And then they're going to have to deal with disappointment, and deal with the thought of blaming others. Oh, the server was always bugging me, and the food arrived. It wasn't the right temperature, and it came too fast, or it came too slow, and blah 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 blah. Or they didn't have the right dessert. Everything and they came around with this showing all these different desserts. How long has it been sitting out in the air? My goodness, what diseases could it pick up? So, that exists, right? That kind of attitude exists. But to be somebody who's easy to please, then you end up being somebody who has more time to be able to dedicate to studying the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, things like that, which takes time to have an effect. And reciprocate kindness. So, it's something that it's kind of natural to be grateful and somebody who has been kind to you when they're in need to return that kindness, and that's something that's quite natural, and it's just um, it's a good practice, and generally it just feels good to act like that. But to be the kind of person that when they're in need, they look to others and call on others to help. But when they're in need, then one is, oh, I can't help, blah blah blah. That's really like uh, that ungratefulness, and that's a callous attitude. So you've heard my voice now for like an hour and 45 minutes. Were there any questions about what I've said so far? I've been trying to cover some of the subjects, where it's, you have to find a middle way, like give up the gain or give up concealing one's own good qualities, where there's a middle way that one needs to approach that kind of stuff. But that I think that's what I said is realistic, and also following Geshe Noen Darga's commentary on this that follows exactly the same way that he regarded it. So I'm not falling into any extreme. Whereas if I said, "Oh, you have to give up all thoughts of acquiring any wealth whatsoever in order to practice the Dharma," then there'd be a few questions. So that's one thing I like about this, because when I read this the first time, I was thinking, my goodness, where's all the verses about emptiness? Because of course that's a subject I really like, and it was just kind of everyday normal things like reciprocating kindness. Who needs to know that? It's already known. Everybody knows that. So, and yet it's not practiced all the time. There's even though it can, when we might see it in the movies or something like that, we'd immediately recognize it. Oh, what a callous person! How bad! But it's real life situations that people are, when they can be so selfish that that they'll seek help from others when they need it, but when others need it from themselves, they've got no time, or they're maxed out with their own uh, resources, nothing to help, nothing to give. But it's, I don't know. There's one type of generosity. It's called loving kindness. We can at least love others, and with that love, you want to help in any way that you can. Of course, there's some things we can't do, but some things we can do, and it's good to even do little things if that's all that one can do. Because there's also a reputation. It can be a personal sort of reputation attachment, where one feels like, oh, you know, I keep on, every month I keep on getting this request to give, blah blah blah. I can't. There's so many things I have to give, because one is thinking that one has to give $100 each time somebody asks. I mean, maybe $5, but if a million people give $5, that's a lot. So one can do little things, and it still contributes. And it's especially, and although that's just normal human kindness, for the Bodhisattva path, it's a requirement, right? We're required to take Bodhisattva vows, and Bodhisattva vows include vows regarding the practice of the perfection of generosity. And you perfect generosity by practicing generosity. You only, and it's not perfected by eliminating all poverty in the universe. No, that's not how generosity is perfected. It's perfected by having a generous mind that always is happy to give, and to give what's appropriate and when it's appropriate. That is achieving the perfection, is becoming a Buddha, and the Buddhist way of being generous. But the transcendent generosity, which is a better translation than the word that's commonly translated as perfection, is viewing oneself and the objects that one gives, and the receiver of the objects, by recalling the emptiness of inherent existence, and one is engaging in generosity, not because nothing exists. That's not the emptiness of inherent existence. It's one is free from an illusion that things exist in their own right, and therefore would be independent of anything. So one is engaging in generosity with an understanding of the interdependency of things. And so it's like, for sure, if I have something that I don't need, and you need it, happy to give it like that, happy to give it. So it's But one needs to practice in like the time that when I was in India and I had to go and get a new visa. So I was at the visa office. So it's, there's all kinds of police around there. It's an official building and all this kind of thing. And I saw this old grandfather and his grandson going around the foundation of the building and putting sugar around to feed the ants. Who practices the generosity of feeding the ants? I never saw that before in my life. And I just thought, my goodness. So, so when, it's an example of, like what before it starts to rain, or if it's really too dry, ants will come into the house, right? And, uh, and so, of course, at those times, you want to make sure that all the food is well covered and stuff like that. And so they were coming in where the cat food was, and of course they're really after the wet cat food. So if the cat food is covered with ants, the cat won't eat it. So you have to put the container with the cat food in a larger container with water, right? So, but then you see that the ants are needing water too. I, so we have this like dish where the cat food dishes are, and so I put a little water into that dish so that they could get some water. And I just felt, I never practiced that before, but that's a way to practice generosity. So I can be happy that they're getting some water. They're not interfering with the cat's food. They're not someplace where I'm stepping on them. They're not going any place else where there's food. So we can live copacetically like that. So for sure, when you practice generosity, you have to practice in a way that you can, right? That's not unrealistic. There's, like there's the people who want to benefit other living beings, and then they put themselves in an impossible position. Well, they'll just get completely drained and and then they won't be good for anything. So you have to be realistic about what you can do. But one shouldn't limit one's ability to practice generosity just because one can't, practice generosity like a millionaire or something like that. There's all kinds of ways that one can practice, even by having the thought of loving kindness towards other beings is a form of generosity. And with that thought, then the opportunities to actually benefit with whether it's with some material generosity or whether it's good advice generosity or a generosity of of seeing yourself as like a servant for living beings like that, then one can do that.
Erin has her hand up. Do you still have a question, Erin? Please unmute.
Thank you. Beautiful teachings. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So my question would be, because I have limited time to sit on the cushion and I'm not such a good meditator with, really moving towards calm abiding in this life, but I want to make sure that I'm trying to take steps. Trying to think of ways during the day that I can try to practice mindfulness that might help me towards that calm abiding one day. Could you suggest maybe some things?
Yes, before every meal, uh, become aware of your motivation for eating the food and like viewing that food as fuel for the effort you make to practice the Dharma, to become a better human being, to have the ability to be a friend to others. Even like saying a prayer before one engages in a meal like that. So that's 3 times a day, and to start with that, and then add more times, like when you wake up in the morning, to generate the thought, okay, how am I going to use the day? How am I going to dedicate the day? And then at night, when you go to sleep, before you go to sleep, think, well, how did I do? Let me do a little bit of an assessment. I woke up this morning, I generated the thought, I'm going to use this day to follow the teachings, to be of benefit to living beings, to avoid creating negative karma, to just become a better human being. How did I do at the end of the day? And if there was any mistakes that one made, one can practice purification. You know, regretting those mistakes, taking refuge in the three jewels, applying the teachings, doing something virtuous like reciting mantra, something like that, to purify the negative karma, and then making a determination to avoid that mistake in some realistic way in the future. Like for myself, when I say prayers generally, like I might say, and I must avoid negative karma as much as possible in the future. I'm not saying, and I will always avoid negative karma in the future, because that would be telling a lie. I'm not able to do that. So, but you know, having that kind of a purification practice at the end of the day, which corresponds to how you began the day, and then having these moments like before each meal that you take, then that's you know, that's 5 times already that one is looking at one's motivation like that. So that's how one begins. And there's, you know, when I was a monk, then we would, you know, the clothing was set up in such a way that, like, if you recall the upper vest that Tibetan monks and nuns wear, these the shoulder part kind of sticks out a little bit, and that's like the ears of an elephant. And are the ears of an elephant something that why should clothing remind you of the ears of an elephant? Because an elephant is well known for its memory. And also, a monk and a nun have to remember they have vows. So when they walk, they might grab a hold of that ear to remember the fact that they have vows, and they also have to control their mind. So when they walk, they would uh, yeah, control their mind. They might look just where they're about to walk so they don't step on sentient beings, and they don't learn to look to the left and look to the right, because then they could develop attachment or anger or something. Just mind their own business and move forward like that. So there's all kinds of skill that you can develop. You know, as you know, even when you're putting on clothes, if you have an initiation, you can imagine that you're the deity putting on the deity's ornaments, and or the very fact, or even if you don't have an initiation, the fact that you have clothes is dependent upon the kindness of other living beings, even if they weren't motivated by kindness. They're kind because without them, you wouldn't have the clothing that you have to wear. And so by remembering that fact that you're interconnected with others can also help motivate you to use your life in a way that your interconnectedness with others is positive. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Pendela. Very inspiring.
Okay. And we've run out of time.
Oh, sorry. No, I can ask. I can ask after.
What's the other question?
Oh, just thank you, Pende. Kind of a mechanical question about calm abiding practice. When one is, when one creates a visualization of the object, should one also be able to maintain awareness of the visual field simultaneously? So, you know, if you're sort of sitting on the cushion with your eyes closed, you see sort of a blurry, you know, a reminder that you're not sleeping. should be you be able to maintain awareness of that simultaneously with the object that you're concentrating upon?
It's good to just focus on the object that you've decided to meditate on, and then whatever appears, that's what you keep your attention on. And then over time, it'll appear more and more clearly. But as for the surroundings, are you talking about like the paradise where Buddha might be abiding in, or
No, I'm
your own
simply
room?
talking
Or,
about, the my visual cortex kind of reminding me, right, that
okay, so
it's two channels really.
right, you don't want to use your visual consciousness when you're meditating on a visualized object. You use your mental consciousness, and through the power of imagination, you're imagining the image in front of you. And you'll use memory that from looking at an example of the object, you'll use that to recreate the object in front of you, but you won't use visual consciousness. If you use visual consciousness, you'll only get a headache, and it'll strain your eyes because your eyelids will be closed or partially closed, and then if you're trying to see the object with closed eyes, it'll cause a strain, eye strain. So I found that when I was doing that meditation for a while, that I needed to have my eyes partially opened so that I could distinguish between viewing something with my mental consciousness and viewing something with visual consciousness.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there's a friend of mine who thought he was going blind because he was visualizing the object and it was causing, terrible strain. It's because he was trying to see it with his eyes. And to this day, I have a tendency to do that. So I always have to open my eyes a little bit to avoid that. And when I feel a strain, I'm thinking, there it goes again. So much in the habit of, I'm such a visual person, right? Okay, we're done. Thank you all so much. And
Thank you
look
so
forward
much,
to the next
Pende.
time. And please, if you've definitely have generated some merit. Just taking the time to be here, let alone the effort to listen and to try to understand correctly what's been said, is meritorious. So please dedicate that for your profound purposes, such as to become fully enlightened for the sake of all living beings, and for all the other purposes that you have. There can be others that those who are you're very close to that are having difficulties, then that whatever uh, um, resources that they need, may they get those resources, and so on. There's so many things you can dedicate your merit to, and then also generate some joy that you are able to generate merit that you can dedicate in this way.